Lubna Jamal immigrated to the United States from Pakistan about 20 years ago. Last week, I invited her into my fancy podcasting studio, aka my bedroom closet, to talk to her about how she teaches her two sons about their cultural heritage and family history.
So when I think about it and when you approached me, I was thinking more from my perspective as an immigrant. So I was thinking of, okay, what did I have to do in addition to what I might not have done had I still been living in Pakistan, right, and raising my boys there. So it's incumbent on us then to uphold those traditions and make sure that they're aware of how things used to be and how they are, whether it's celebrations, milestones, whether it's religious traditions. So all of that, then onus sometimes is primarily on us as parents then to maintain that.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. I met Lubna on the tennis sidelines when our sons were serendipitously matched up as doubles partners last fall. We connected right away as we cheered our boys on and talked about our mutual passions for riding, hiking, and exploring. From our first conversation, I knew I wanted to give you the privilege of meeting this fascinating woman too on the podcast. Lubna is a mother of 2 teenage boys and a woman with many passions and interests. Her endless curiosity has led her down many paths, from teaching to writing to photography and now to business school. You can find her beautiful photography gallery at lubnajamalphotography.com. It was when I read her blog at themeanderingpath.com that I knew the main topic I wanted to discuss with Lubna. In one post, she recorded her father-in-law's fascinating account of his experiences during the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. I loved the fact that she was preserving this history for her family, and I wanted to know more about how she teaches her sons about their culture and their family. In fact, I'm working on a whole episode on this topic, so I'd love to know how you do this as well. If you have any ideas to share on this topic or know of someone else who does, you can email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com, or you can join the How She Moms Facebook group where we'll be talking about this in a week or two. Anyway, back to Lubna. I started by asking her why it matters that we teach kids about family history and culture.
I think it's crucial that, in order to appreciate where you are right now, you need to understand where you came from, right? So, and you should take it, the good, the bad, all of it, right? So you should have that curiosity. And then I think kids are sometimes amazed at some of the anecdotes that we share with them and what that could reveal about their adults in their life and possibly the misconceptions that perhaps they had, because even though our kids these days they're very anti-stereotypes, but they tend to make stereotypes of the adults in their lives. So for example, in my family, like when they do sit down and have that conversation with their grandparents and they learn interesting things about them, they would never have known that if that opportunity didn't exist. So I think for traditions, certain traditions, I feel, should be upheld. Of course, there needs to be some determination of how much value a certain tradition is adding, right? Given our circumstances and our environment right now.
Lubna pinpointed celebrations, travel, food, community, and music as some of the key ways she teaches her children about their heritage. And, as it happens, this episode is releasing on the first full day of the Islamic holiday of Ramadan, the most important religious holiday for her family. I asked her to explain how they celebrate.
For Ramadan, what we have to do is for 1 month, we have to get up slightly earlier in the morning, have our breakfast around 4 o'clock, and then we cannot eat or drink till evening time at sunset. So it can be challenging, especially these days when the days are longer. And so in the beginning, my husband and I, of course, we observe it very regularly. And when our kids were younger, they started getting curious. Okay, what are you doing? And what's this for? And at the end of Ramadan, we have this big celebration, which is called Eid, which is pretty much the equivalent of Christmas, right? So they got curious, and I've never really pushed religious traditions too much, but like we'll model it and we'll try to, say if you want to join us in the prayers, so on and so forth. But then they felt like they could take the challenge, and it started with 1 day, and then it started with half days and then a full day. And now they're at the point where they've been doing most of them, like for all 30 days almost. And so it's not just the simple act of just eating, but it's also a more holistic thing of being more virtuous in your thoughts and your words and your actions, and also, of course, staying away from the food and drink, which is, it's a big thing to overcome, and especially when they're in school, right? So even now I was like saying, "All right, will you be okay? Do you really want to do this?" And they're like, "Yes, of course we will do this." So initially it's harder to teach the kids about that because it has to be intrinsic. But it's more than just fasting from the food and all. It has to be more about virtue and in a mindful way, right? Yeah. So that's a big religious tradition and our fast, when we break our fast, it's a food fest. And so that's a cultural aspect of things. I don't think it has to be that way, but like we open our fast with dates, so they understand that now. And, so certain nuances like that also weave their way in through these religious traditions that we observe. Then when we actually celebrate Eid, which is like the culmination of Ramadan, it's a very important day because we started the day off by going to the mosque. So then they see that sense of community there because there's so many people they visit. Some of them might be their friends. So it's a way for them to, exchange greetings. We exchange gifts as well. So that's something they look forward to. They wear their traditional clothes on Eid day. Sometimes they have the day off from school that day. So again, it's something like we had to cultivate. Like I know a lot of families here, immigrant families like myself, who have not been able to do that. And so their kids don't quite experience it the same way. Yeah. But for me, it was important that, being away from home, that my kids get that aspect of it as well, because they see, the festiveness of Christmas. And they love it and we enjoy it as well. But sometimes they want something that belongs to them. And so this gives them that sense of belonging too.
Yeah. Another big way they celebrate with their family is by attending weddings. And let me tell you, you'll want to spend some time on YouTube seeing what a Pakistani wedding looks like. This is a culture that knows how to celebrate.
I think when it comes to culture, in a snapshot, you should attend a wedding. Like it has everything in it, right? The food, the dresses. So that's the perfect cultural experience as a wedding, and religious actually. So recently my nephew got married. And so that was the first wedding that my sons were very involved in. So they prepared dances, like the local, like traditional dances, and they wore their traditional clothes. And they had a blast. And so that was another great connection to understanding where they were coming from. And they would never have had that had it not been for that opportunity. And if they were living in Pakistan, it becomes kind of taken for granted because you have a wedding season, right? Everybody's getting married in December. You'll always dress up and you'll go, right? But for kids here, that's not a very common occurrence. So it's, few and far between. And so we try to maximize on those. We make a concerted effort, even though sometimes it can get expensive, to go out and try to attend these meetings or these reunions, weddings, whatever, so that we can meet our family, right? And not just us meet them, but our kids too. Yeah. So for some of them, they would never get the chance to meet them if it weren't for these occasions. So it's even more important that we make that extra effort, even for friends, their kids' events. Because then again, it's building that sense of community. And I think community is so important when it comes to traditions, upholding them and celebrations, all of that. Because when I came here, even though I came here 20 years ago, neither myself nor my husband have any family here. So we have family in other states, but not primarily like within a 20-mile radius, right? And that's so unlike what we were used to growing up, because there, any time of the day, the doorbell would ring and someone would pop in, right? So the sense of community is very different here. So we adapted, of course. Now our friends are like family. So we found that community. And I think in some ways it's we are better and luckier because we have a much more diverse community here. So it's not just our family like it would have been in Pakistan, but here we have, friends from all walks of life, from different faiths. So our kids are very lucky that they get that exposure, which we didn't have growing up.
I asked Lubna how frequently they're able to travel as a family to Pakistan.
Travel played a huge role in our lives in terms of upholding these cultural values and traditions. Usually it has played out in such a way that I will go visit one year and then my parents would come. But now they're getting older, so it's harder for them to travel. So I think it'll be more of us going back. A few times I went just by myself, and then I realized, no, I need to take the kids with me too. And doing it at the right age for the kids was important. So we used to take them when they were younger, but they hardly have any memory of that. I mean, they'll remember that they met so-and-so or, certain things. But when I took them last time, we spent the entire summer there, it was very good for them because it was eye-opening in many ways. They're not used to that lifestyle. So they experienced both the positives and the negatives, right? So they were able to interact with local people. They understood nuances in culture too. So I'll give you an example. For example, here, so American culture, shorts, it is the go-to, right? All these boys in their synthetic shorts. Right. And when we went back to Pakistan, they're a much more conservative society, right? And I always knew that growing up from my own experience as a female, but I never realized that for men. And so it was like certain places they could not just go in shorts. And like it didn't have to be like a 5-star restaurant, but even like certain normal places like certain parks or public areas where it's kind of looked down upon if the boys are wearing shorts. And my older one looks older too, like he has a beard and everything, so they think he's a man. So that was eye-opening. It was a different perspective, but then they got to enjoy the food there and enjoy the way people live and like going out and interacting with different kids their ages, like their cousins, second cousins, essentially, understanding, how do they go to school, where do they go to school, what do they study, extracurriculars. So it was a very good experience for them. Then in terms of lifestyle, because we used to have a lot of like power outages, so understanding, scarcity of resources and third world versus first world issues. So it was very different for them.
What kind of conversations did you have throughout that experience?
For both my sons, it was different. For my older one, he is more reflective and, he'll dig deeper. He enjoyed, for example, visiting certain sites and understanding the history behind those sites because the subcontinent is a very historically rich region. So, like, we would visit a mosque that was built 500 years ago. And so understanding architecture. And so having that experience firsthand, like you can't read about it in a book and have the same appreciation, right? So being there, understanding it and really having a tour guide that is local and explaining, how the Mughals, for example, built the walls in the mosque so that the acoustics would be great for the call to prayer. And so we recorded all our experiences in our videos and our photographs, and it's a good historical record of their trip. But I think it was eye-opening for them too. Understanding and just commuting between cities and knowing the differences between the different cities and how people so they could pick up on those things. We didn't need to have a conversation per se, but they understood it, right? The different regions or how the locals would change their dialect. Shopping. So that was a huge thing for them too, like going into the bazaars. And then you have the malls as well, which are more westernized. So then they could compare, what is truly cultural versus what has become more consumeristic. Yeah. But yeah, travel has been one of the big things for us. My brother lives in Dubai, so they got to experience a different culture there in the United Arab Emirates. And we took a safari, and they do like these performances and something like, more in tune with their own cultural aspects. So then they could compare and contrast that to when they visited Pakistan.
Back at home, they naturally reinforced their culture with everyday things like food and music.
Food is that biggest, I think, bridge, cultural bridge. And I'm very lucky that both my sons are foodies, so they enjoy the food. And it's interesting because they tend to enjoy some very traditional dishes that even I think kids growing up in Pakistan don't necessarily like because of the flavor palettes. My mother-in-law makes this particular dish. So traditionally we have meat and potatoes is a very traditional dish, but she cooks a variation of it with taro root, I want to say, and it has a distinctive taste. And my younger son just loves that. I was telling that to another friend, and she's like, "Really? That's very unusual." So we're very lucky that way that food has been the great conveyor, I guess, of day-to-day cultural aspects of life. Every Saturday we do like a traditional Pakistani breakfast. So that's become tradition now. We make omelets, but make it in the Pakistani way. So it's different from the traditional omelet that's served here. Yeah, so my husband loves to cook as well, so he'll make lots of dishes that they like, that we grew up eating. So when they went to Pakistan, it wasn't such a big culture shock for them. And of course, they could taste the differences. Like, for example, my younger one, Haris, he's like, I want to go and see an actual tandoor, where they make the naans. So it's like a big giant pit, super hot, and they stick the bread on there. So that's an experience to just see it being made. So things like that. Yeah, food has been the easiest way to do it on a day-to-day basis.
So what about language? Do your children speak?
They speak English primarily. My older one will understand and sometimes attempt to speak Urdu, primarily because he's more interested in it.
Okay.
And again, a lot of culture coming in there because of songs and music. So we have a lot of Bollywood influence too in Pakistan. And so I enjoy listening to that. And so he's kind of like picked it up from me. And so I'll cross his room and he'll be listening to Bhangra music or, things like that.
Another daily key to reinforcing their family history is the fact that Lubna's mother and father-in-law actually live with them.
My in-laws joined us about, 8 years ago, I want to say, 2012. Yeah, 2012 they came. And it was like a big change for them, especially because they're elderly. Like my father-in-law was 88 at the time. So leaving behind, their homeland and all their relatives, whoever was surviving, and to make that move here was definitely difficult for them too. But they've adapted. They love it here. They're citizens, so we went through that entire process of citizenship with them. And my kids played a key role in preparing them for it. So they, with the tests and all, and making sure that they remember U.S. history. I think in Pakistan, we are used to having extended families. We call it the joint family system because it's very common for multiple families to be living under the same roof. Growing up, I wasn't part of a joint family. However, we still had a lot of family around us. For my kids, it's slightly harder because we have such huge families from both sides that it's hard for them to keep track, but they definitely they will know their great-grandfathers. And so we've discussed that. My sister did this project a while ago where she traced out the family history on my side, and she presented it to me in a book. So that is another way where we can bring that in. Mm-hmm. When my kids were younger, I had made, for each one of them, I kind of made like a photo album. And I had interspersed between their birth pictures and first birthdays, things like that. I started putting in pictures of some of our family historical pictures in there. So they would peruse through it and they'll be like, who's that or who's that? And so it would be a good conversation starter of, okay, this is this person or this is this person. From my grandfather, he held a very important position in Pakistan. So when we go back, they have those conversations with my mother, their grandmother. And so they have that understanding. But it's difficult for them, I guess, because, again, they've never met some of these ancestors, right? So they've only heard stories about them. But I think storytelling is another great way for them to build that link. I had the good fortune that my parents did a lot of storytelling with us. Like my mother's memory is like a supercomputer, so she could figure out links between such and such relative and what they were. And so we always grew up listening to these stories. And then from my father's side, he used to serve in the army, so he always has these anecdotes to share. And anytime we're sitting there and the kids are there, so he'll just start relaying it. And they might have heard it, a couple of times, but it doesn't hurt them. It ingrains it in memory to hear it again. And then similarly with my father-in-law, because sometimes he would start sharing those memories, or like my mother-in-law, she's from Kashmir. She would share how she would go to school, or, her experiences from childhood. And we would end up having sessions where, the conversation would last a long time and they get curious. So storytelling, I think, has been another great way of maintaining that link.
This idea of teaching our kids about their family history and really about themselves through stories is one of my very favorite things about my conversation with Lubna. I loved learning more about her traditions and culture, and especially about how deliberately she teaches her sons about it. It's something I'm passionate about as well, and something we can all do, whether we travel halfway around the world to do it or just a few miles. Thank you for listening to the How She Moms podcast. If you like it, tell a friend. The bigger the community, the more ideas. There are lots of ways you can add your ideas to the How She Moms community. We have a Facebook group where we share ideas about upcoming topics and help each other solve problems we're facing in motherhood. You can also follow How She Moms on Instagram for quick tips and ideas. And you can go to howshemoms.com where you'll find transcripts of episodes and lots of other great resources. Special thanks to my mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.